everyone, welcome back to the channel and to another weekly recap. We're down to week 4, so a couple of more weeks to go, and we have a week break, by the way, starting next Monday, so we're not back until the 16th of May, which means I get a break as well. So let's get straight into it because I actually have a lot to cover today, and I will try to be as efficient as possible, and I'm going to summarize as much as possible. I'm sure you understand it's a lot of content. Let's get started. So our first witness for week 4 was Travis McGivern, one of Johnny's security guards. Now, he no longer works for Johnny full-time. He works for someone else in Los Angeles full-time, but he has worked with Johnny and for Johnny for 9 years. Now, Travis's relevance really comes down to the staircase incident of the 23rd of March 2015, right after the horrific Australia incident. But before we get to that, in general, he just talked about how he would see Johnny pretty much on a daily basis whenever Johnny was in LA. And his testimony was very consistent to everyone else who had observed the relationship between Johnny and Amber, in the sense that it started off great, but then it progressively got worse. He testified that he witnessed Amber calling Johnny all sorts of horrific words that he didn't even want to say out loud in court, but he basically said anything under the sun, she would call him. And Johnny would typically always try to leave, which is once again consistent with the testimony of many other witnesses, even independent witnesses who did not directly work for Johnny, such as Ben King. With regards to Australia, Travis does play a part in picking Amber up from the airport. And this was on the 9th of March 2015, and Ben King, the property manager, was with her. When he picked her up, Travis testified that it was early in the afternoon, and so the sun was bright, it was shining, he could see her very clearly. He got very close to her because he greeted them. He wasn't sure if he hugged her, but he did collect her bags and spent maybe 45 minutes to an hour with her in the car, driving her back to the ECB, and then also went up to the penthouse with her very briefly to drop her bags. To Travis, Amber seemed perfectly normal as Amber would be, and most importantly, he did not observe any injuries. Now, we are going to get to Amber's testimony, and so the fact that yet again, apart from Debbie Lloyd, Dr. Kipper, Malcolm Connolly, and of course Johnny himself, all of these witnesses testified that she had no injuries whatsoever, barring the scratches on her left forearm that Ben noticed while they were disembarking the flight in LA. On to the 23rd of March 2015, which is the incident that Amber states was the first and only time that she punched Johnny in defense of her sister Whitney. Now, Travis gives a very different account of that incident, which again aligns with Johnny's version of the incident. So Travis got a text from Johnny early in the morning to get Debbie Lloyd, the nurse, and come over to the penthouse because there was a fight. Travis did as he was told. When he first arrived, he saw Amber down in the lobby. I believe Debbie stayed with her, and he said that he rushed up to the penthouse intent on getting Johnny out of there before Amber made her way back up. When he was asked why, he explained that she had a tendency to stop him from leaving. And this once again is completely consistent with not only Johnny's testimony, but Debbie Lloyd herself. Examples of what she would do were also in alignment with what Debbie said, which is she would block the elevator, she would follow them around, she would block the door. Travis testified that Johnny already had his bags ready to go, and at one point, Amber came back up. Now, he and Debbie left for a little while, but then they came back in. Eventually, Travis sees Amber throw a can of Red Bull at Johnny, and it does hit him in the back. She threw something else. He wasn't sure. I think he said it could have been a bag, but Travis managed to knock it away at that point, and she also spat at Johnny. At one point, Amber leaves with her sister, and Johnny gets very upset and starts to kind of rearrange her closet. But that's as far as it went. This is the thing with Johnny. Every witness, including Johnny, will testify that he takes his anger out and his frustrations out on inanimate objects. And once again, this incident is completely consistent with that account of Johnny. Now, Amber comes back, and at this point, Travis stands in between them. Now, Travis was very particular about the fact that he made it a point to stand in between them because she'd already landed a few blows on Johnny, which made Travis feel that he wasn't doing his job because his job was to protect Johnny. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that he wouldn't have protected Amber if Johnny was being physical himself, which Travis does clarify in cross-exam when Rottenborn tries to go down that route. But essentially, he confirmed that he was standing in between them. And she basically went around Travis's shoulder and landed a punch squarely on the left side of Johnny's face. He wasn't too sure about where Whitney was, but his best guess was that she was behind Amber. Now, very importantly, he testified as to Johnny's reaction. And he said, same reaction as mine, just complete and utter shock. But he never retaliated. So Travis quickly evacuated Johnny for his own safety. And before they even left the penthouse, the punch had already left a pretty nasty swelling and a red bruise. Travis then testified that at that point, it was out of Johnny's hands. Johnny had no say in the matter. Travis's goal was to evacuate his client because his safety had already been compromised. He also confirmed that Johnny's hand was heavily bandaged. He wasn't sure if it was a hard cast or a soft cast. With regards to the 21st of April 2016, the night of Amber's 30th birthday dinner party, he wasn't there, but he was called to once again evacuate Johnny, basically help him escape the situation. And very similar to the 23rd of March 2015, Johnny already had a couple of bags ready and he was just ready to go. He saw Amber and she seemed fine with no injuries. In general, he testified that he'd never seen Johnny lay a finger on Amber or anyone. But of course, we've already discussed that he couldn't exactly say the same about Amber. He also testified that with regards to drugs and alcohol, the only effect is that Johnny would just mellow out even further on both. Otherwise, there was no difference. And Johnny's version of drunk is falling asleep sitting up on the couch with his boots still on. In terms of Amber, he did testify that she drank very regularly and that he thinks, he had no direct evidence, he didn't witness her getting drunk, but he thinks based on her behavior that she was drunk during the staircase incident. In cross-exam, of course, Rottenborn went straight for the "you're the employee on the payroll" argument. That is the first argument that Amber's team gets onto as soon as they sink their teeth into Johnny's witnesses. He argued that Johnny was his priority, and this is when Travis went, "that is incorrect," which to me very clearly told the jury that if it had been the other way around, he wouldn't have just let Johnny do whatever. He would have defended Amber and evacuated her. Rottenborn tried to argue that Whitney was the one in between them to, corroborate Amber's version of the story. And Travis said absolutely not. He was incredibly firm on the fact that he was standing in between them to defend Johnny. Now, Travis is subject to recall in the rebuttal stage. Moving on to Jack Whigham, who is Johnny's talent agent. And the entire tactic of this witness, for examination in chief at least, or direct exam, as you say in the States, is that Johnny's career and reputation were virtually unaffected until the op-ed. So this is important because she made allegations in 2016. We went to 2017 at the height of the Me Too movement, and still Jack testified that Johnny was very much in high demand. In fact, 2017, as I said, at the height of the Me Too movement, was a particularly busy year for Johnny and very typical in terms of income and the amount of work that he was getting. This is very important because it demonstrates to the jury that until the op-ed, Johnny's career was fine. Now, Jack's been Johnny's manager since October 2016, so well after the allegations and well after the separation. He gave a stellar review of Johnny Depp's personality, not just personally, but also within the industry. And here is the kicker. Jack confirmed that they had actually finished negotiating Johnny's role for Pirates 6. So it was essentially confirmed, but it was done verbally. And of course, in cross-exam, this was really a point of contention, but we'll get to that. Now, the deal for Pirates was closed for $22.5 million. So that's how much Johnny would have been paid for his role or for continuing his role as Captain Jack Sparrow. He was present in 2017 when Johnny would continue to socialize with Disney execs, and he stated that the relationship was still solid, again, post allegations, and they were still happy with him. He talked about how he understood and everyone else in Hollywood understood exactly who Amber Heard was referring to in the op-ed, despite the fact that Johnny was never named. And he described that the impact of this op-ed on Johnny's career was catastrophic. He then went on to describe how it was virtually impossible to convince Disney to employ Johnny again after the op-ed, and that it was very difficult, pretty much impossible, to book Johnny for movies and projects in the period between December 2018, late December 2018, and October 2020. And he also clarified that COVID, while it had an impact, wasn't really to blame, especially with high-profile names like Johnny Depp, where they would have still been in high demand despite the pandemic. Now, in cross-exam, the tactic was that the pre-existing lawsuit in the UK against The Sun, which was filed in June 2018, I believe, and the news coverage over that was to blame for the hit on Johnny's career. But essentially, Jack's statement that the deal for Pirates was closed was attacked because there was no written confirmation, there was no contract, there was no email. But then Jack tried to explain to Elaine that this was the norm in Hollywood, verbal agreements, verbal deals, and that usually things wouldn't be put down in paper until production, or pre-production at least, has officially kicked off. And this was clarified in the redirect phase. Now, there was some foul play, I think, here in the cross-exam, because Elaine pulled up the Sun article, read out the title. Of course, the jury heard it. She also started to read out the body of the article in front of the jury, but then Ben quickly objected to that on grounds of hearsay, which was sustained. And so again, as I said, the whole tactic was there was a pre-existing article way before the op-ed was even thought of, and you cannot say for certain that Johnny's career wasn't impacted. But Jack was really instrumental in debunking that, I believe, because he stated that Johnny took the first half of 2018 off. 2017 was a very busy year for him, and so he wanted to take a break and go touring with the Hollywood Vampires, and he didn't really commit to any work until the fall of 2018. So he made it difficult, I believe, for Amber's side to convince the jury that 2018 was a bad year for Johnny because of the Sun article, when Johnny wasn't accepting work anyway. This comes up a few times with further expert witnesses that we will get to in a moment. Now, Jack Whigham is also subject to recall. Next witness is Richard Marks, who is an entertainment lawyer and an expert on the entertainment industry. And the tactic with him in terms of examination in chief is to show the jury how devastating the op-ed has been on Johnny's career and reputation within Hollywood. So Richard described all the work that he did to fulfill this role, examining the op-ed, all the evidence, the pleadings, and his general opinion is that the op-ed damaged Johnny Depp, created a cancel situation, so he's referring to cancel culture, harmed his reputation, and his ability to get work in the industry. He spoke about the importance of an actor's reputation in relation to getting hired in Hollywood. So studios want to maximize profits, as every other business under the sun, and steer clear of any negativity. And since the Me Too movement in particular, he described DV and SA allegations as the pinnacle of negativity in Hollywood. And this is particularly so with studios that are family friendly, such as Disney. Now, specifically in terms of the impact of the op-ed, Richard spoke of how the Washington Post is a flagship of journalism in American news. It is a very well-respected, highly regarded publication. And Hollywood got the subject matter of the op-ed loud and clear. He stated that everyone understood this to be Amber Heard calling out Hollywood for supporting her abuser and called them out to do something about it. He also talked about the timing of the publication. As we spoke about in previous recaps, it was timed right at the release of Aquaman, for maximal impact. The tactic in cross-exam was that, again, there have been countless tabloids and bad press, essentially, about Johnny Depp before not just the op-ed, but before the allegations too. So they pulled up article after article after article of tabloids, you know, doing their thing, doing what tabloids do. Clickbait, trying to sell by spinning stories about actors that are most likely and most often far-fetched and untrue. Now, Richard stood his ground and agreed that, yes, there was negative press before, even before the allegations, but it was nothing like the op-ed. And Jack Whigham testified to something similar, I believe, as well. He said the op-ed, being a first-hand account authored by Amber herself, was particularly impactful. I personally believe that Amber's team made their case more difficult by doing this, by going through countless articles that were essentially negative towards Johnny, because to me, it only demonstrated to the jury how, despite all of this negativity, you know, prior to the allegations, Johnny Depp was essentially still a very well-loved, respected, and highly regarded actor. And so it only shows how devastating the op-ed was. Now, Richard also testified that in comparison to Me Too accusations, everything else, all this tabloid garbage about drugs and alcohol, for example, is background noise. It just doesn't matter. Now, they also pulled up the Sun article with Richard, and he said that the Sun is trash, essentially. And it's different to the op-ed, as, again, it wasn't authored by the victim. It's released in a tabloid magazine that, you know, objectifies women. I'm kind of cleaning up the language here, but essentially, that's what he said, as opposed to the Washington Post. So what are you going to take more seriously? The Sun, trash, tabloids, or the Washington Post? Our next expert witness is Douglas Bania, and he is an intellectual property, damages, and valuation expert. He has a particular expertise in internet and social media analytics. So his role was to demonstrate how the allegations and the op-ed negatively impacted the general public's opinion on Johnny Depp. And he used the internet, social media, search engines, you know, Google, to collect this information and analyze it. The results of his analysis was that prior to the allegations, so not the op-ed, the 2016 allegations, Johnny Depp was not portrayed in a negative connotation. After 2016, the majority of the results were about the allegations, but then even more so after the op-ed. And what else he found interesting was that after the op-ed, there was an increase in negative coverage over Johnny in general, including his drug and alcohol usage. The tactic in cross-exam was firstly that 2016 is not relevant. Johnny is only suing her over the op-ed, so why are you bringing up the 2016 allegations? And also that the negative ratings were impacted by other publications and other negative press unrelated to the op-ed and even predating the allegations. So it's a very similar tactic that they adopted with Richard, the entertainment lawyer. Now, they brought up the Sun again, and they said it would have been impossible for you to separate the impact of the Sun and the op-ed on Johnny's career. Douglas responded that he didn't try to separate them as it wasn't part of his analysis. So he wasn't tasked to look into the impact of the Sun article. His analysis focused on the op-ed. So the 18th of December, for example, was a marker for him rather than April 2018 when the British article was released. In response to 2016 not being relevant, Douglas disagreed. He said that it's about the allegations as a whole, which is correct because context is incredibly important, as we said, especially when it comes to defamation by implication. And so it would have been nonsensical to ignore 2016 altogether. In fact, I think it was a good control. You know, it showed how, yes, the impact was there after 2016, but the real bad impact kicked in after 2018. So if 2016 was disregarded, then what are we comparing it against, essentially? Next, we move on to Erin Filati, maiden name Whigham. So Amber's on-call private nurse from when she was with Johnny. As with Debbie, the nursing notes were heavily relied upon because she also didn't remember a lot. Now, she wasn't as forgetful as Debbie. She has vague memories, but she did have to refer to her medical notes to refresh her memory. And so they went through a lot of these contemporaneous notes that were written during her time working with Amber. So she doesn't recall at all if Amber ever expressed any fear with regards to Johnny. It was never written down in her notes, and her notes were quite extensive. She had huge paragraphs where she would even write that, I went out to dinner with the patient and she observed how she was behaving. So Erin seemed to be quite particular. And I feel like even she said, if it was something Amber told me, I feel as though I would have written that down. There was also a note detailing that Amber has anger issues. She has several outbursts. She deals with rage. And that reminded Erin, reading that note, of why she was employed to begin with. It's to help her out with these issues. There was also a really important note that completely contradicts Amber's version, which is that a lot of the fights were due to Amber's anxiety and unstable emotions, consistent with Dr. Curry's diagnosis, and that Amber felt insecure, anxious, and jealous whenever Johnny was away on set. Please remember this, because this is an independent nurse writing down what Amber self-reported, which is in complete contradiction to Amber's testimony. On the 17th of December 2015, post James Corden, Erin showed up and Amber looked disheveled. She did have a bleeding lower lip. Amber blamed the injury from the fight. She complained of a bruised head and lost not just clumps of hair. If you listen to her testimony, it evolved to pieces of scalp getting removed. But nothing was observed by the nurse, by Erin. She doesn't recall if Amber was wearing makeup. But let's remember, she was disheveled. She had a bleeding lip. She was at home. And based on that description, it would have been highly unlikely that she was wearing makeup. Also, why would she be wearing makeup and covering bruises if the purpose of Erin's visit was to examine these bruises or these injuries? The note reflected that Erin told her to maybe go to Dr. Kipper or even the hospital to get examined thoroughly, because Erin admitted that that wasn't her area. She was an addiction nurse and she was there for emotional support, much like Debbie Lloyd. And so she encouraged Amber to go have a professional who was trained in the area to examine her, which is what led Amber to visit Dr. Kipper's office and get examined by Nurse Monroe. And I think we went through Nurse Monroe's notes in week 1, where nothing was picked up. Nothing. Not a single injury. No facial asymmetry. Let's not forget that Amber alleged her nose was broken after this incident. And she repeats this in her testimony. So again, in complete contradiction to medical staff. Erin was also shown photos from the 21st of May incident, the photos that Amber took. And much like the police, she struggled to see any injuries. And Amber sent her these photos. That's why they pulled them up. This was a text exchange between them. And Erin never reported this. Dr. Kipper confirmed that he never received a report. Erin never forwarded the photos to him. So clearly when she saw them, she didn't think anything of it. And she confirmed she would have done so if she suspected anything serious. And to her in the photos, it just looked like colors, which matches the police when they were shown the photos. Just, yeah, she's red from crying. Nothing stood out even to Erin as an injury. Erin's notes also revealed that Amber suffered from addiction to various drugs and alcohol. And she also self-reported a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, anxiety, codependence, and an eating disorder. This eating disorder comes into play with Amber's expert psychologist, but essentially it's about her weight loss as a result of the stress of what Johnny put her through towards the end of their marriage. Erin's testimony was very similar to Dr. Curry in the sense that Amber was generally anxious about everything. Another note came up where the nurse noted that Amber has jealousy and insecurity over Johnny's fame and his regular interactions with females, which is completely the other way around if you hear it from Amber. In terms of Australia 2015, she wasn't there, but she met Amber upon her return to LA on the 9th of March, so the very day of her return, and she witnessed no injuries whatsoever. This is her nurse. You would think after the horrific details of what we heard in her testimony over the last couple of days, the first thing she would have wanted to do is have her trusted nurse look over her, confide in her, tell her what had happened. And Erin stresses that she would have written things down if she had noticed anything. Amber didn't seek any medical attention, in fact, when she landed. With regards to the 21st of April 2016, Erin was actually there at that 30th birthday dinner, and she interacted with Johnny, and she actually wrote down in her nursing notes that Johnny appeared to be coherent, oriented, sociable, logical and clear thoughts, and she would have noted if he was obviously drunk or high, which is what Amber alleges, especially since she was an addiction nurse. And she expressed a complete intolerance to illicit drugs when Amber told her that when she went to Coachella, she had drugs and alcohol and even made herself sick. One final interesting point is that Amber at one point had a cyst on her eyelid that was removed. This came up when Johnny's team were questioning her, and Erin doesn't recall the details, but this could explain the marks that we see in some of the photos from around, I think, maybe the December 2015 timeframe. All right, next we have Michael Spindler, who is a forensic, also known as investigative accountant. And his job was to look into Johnny's lost earnings as a direct result of the op-ed. So he analyzed the period post-op-ed, so December 2018 to October 31st, 2020. His analysis showed that Johnny suffered lost earnings of approximately $40.3 million after deducting his agent's 10% commission. The loss of the role of Captain Jack Sparrow itself led to a loss of $22.5 million, as we said. And regarding the other non-franchise roles, usually indie movies, independent movies, Johnny lost just over $20 million. Michael calculated the non-franchise loss by deducting Johnny's expected income of almost $33 million based on the $17.5 million that he earned in 2017. So he was projected to get $33 million, and he only ended up getting, well, I say only, I mean, to us people, it's an exorbitant amount of money. But in comparison to what Johnny could have earned, he ended up getting $10.5 million in this analyzed period, which is a hefty loss. Now, the tactic for cross-exam was to show the jury that many other things could have led to this loss of income and that there was no definitive proof that it was a direct result of the op-ed. So Rottenborn went straight to the payroll comment, by the way, how much this person is getting paid to testify. He also tried to make him seem inexperienced in the area and argued that the alleged damages were assumed to have been caused by the op-ed and that it's not established as fact. He argued that there are many other things that could have impacted this loss of income, and this includes the Sun article, once again, which was published earlier in 2018, or even the 2016 allegations themselves. Now, Michael was quick to explain that it couldn't have been the 2016 allegations because 2017, as stated by Jack Whigham, was actually a very good year for Johnny. His income was high and it was a busy year. He made $17.5 million that year. Michael had to also explain why he picked 2017 rather than 2018 as the last clean year, which was unimpacted by the op-ed. And Michael argued because, 2018 was a year where Johnny took the first half of it off. So he obviously didn't earn as much income because he was touring. And so he obviously wasn't making as much income because he wasn't working. He wasn't accepting work, and he only worked towards the end of 2018. So it was not a good year to pick as a demonstrative of a before and after situation. I think in redirect, Michael did a really good job of clarifying to the jury why 2017 was the best year. And I think it was excellent, again, because it was right after the op-ed, at the height of the Me Too movement, and Johnny was still doing well. So I think that's an excellent way to demonstrate to the jury just how destructive the op-ed was on Johnny's career. And the plaintiff rests. So we now move on to Dr. Don Hughes before I move on to the inimitable Amber Heard. All right, on to Dr. Dawn Hughes, the clinical and forensic psychologist testifying on behalf of Amber Heard. The tactic with this doctor was to use very intentional and biased language. Gendered stereotypes, really, which is ironic because she brings it up and says we have to be careful of gendered stereotypes. So the pronouns used to describe the victim were always female pronouns, and the pronouns used to describe the perpetrator were always male pronouns. She honestly came across as a misandrist who believes that only men can commit violence and females are always on the receiving end of that. She also came across just generally as a very unprofessional witness. And she took on the role that Dr. Curry warned the jury of, which is the role of fact finder. If you remember, Dr. Curry stressed that it's not their role as psychologists or therapists to find the truth or to prove that something is true. Their role, apart from diagnosing, is to be an advocate of their client and support them and help them in their journey to get better. It is important to note, however, that Amber was not her client. She was solely retained for the purposes of this trial. She kept reading from her notes, which is not allowed for anyone, whether you're an expert witness or just a layperson testifying. You are not allowed to carry notes up there with you and refer to them, especially when they haven't been given to you by the attorneys and the judge doesn't have a copy. And she kept doing that and she kept getting into trouble for it. And this is what I mean by she was very unprofessional. She even pulled faces, not necessarily at the jury, but she would look at the jury as she pulled these faces whenever she was interrupted. And just overall, it was not a good look for a professional. I really have to summarize this one because she was testifying for a very long time, but the gender bias was just so evident, you know? As I said, apart from the pronouns, she actually responded to Elaine's question of, you know, does size and strength matter? It's very obvious what they were going for because in one of the audio recordings between Johnny and Amber post-breakup, post-separation, Amber does tell him, you know, who's going to believe you? Look at, you know, you believe that a 115-pound woman can take you on? You know, am I in some kind of a secret fight club? So there was this similarity in the argument. And Dr. Hughes said, of course, size and strength matter. Which, to that I say, what about when someone is sleeping? A man is sleeping, which my partner was essayed in his sleep, by the way. What about when a man is intoxicated? What about when you take him by surprise? Which is something that comes up in cross-exam, but just wanted to set the scene for you of how stereotypical this testimony was. What's really crazy is if you watch this, and I urge you to watch it, her actual testimony, if you listen to her describe all of the typical behaviors of an abuser and then all of the typical behaviors of a victim, the ones attributable to an abuser are 100% Amber Heard's behavior from what we've heard and seen over the past few years, really, but even over the course of this trial. And then the typical victim behavior, as I said, the retreating, the placating, the covering up for their abuser, all Johnny Depp. She talked about how the abuser love bombs the victim. And then there is the apologies, the promises of change. Again, everything we've seen Amber does to Johnny. He didn't even use the word love bombing, but he described in detail how she lured him in and how she seemed to be too perfect, too good to be true. And it lasted for a while. This is known as the love bombing phase. And then the truth comes out. And Dr. Hughes testified to that. Slowly, things get worse. She said that victims can get angry. It's a normal reaction for women to get angry. But she didn't seem to hold the same belief for men. So there was a lot of that. A lot of excusing female behavior. Of course, women will have to throw things because they're not strong. They're not as strong as a man. So it's a lot of excusing for women being violent, describing female violence as low level, mild, whereas male violence tends to be more on the severe end. She brought up statistics of how women are more often the victims, which might be true, but if there's anything I've learned from my personal experiences with living with a male victim, and then my involvement and my coverage of Johnny's case for the last, for over 2 years now, it's that men don't report it. So is it that it happens less often, or is it that it's unreported or underreported? There is a severe issue in that area as well. In terms of the personality disorder, she completely disagrees with Dr. Curry's diagnoses and attacks her method, criticizes her method, says she didn't administer the test correctly. And she also diagnosed Amber with PTSD from Adam Waldman's comments in particular, but ironically not the SA situation in Australia, which I found very strange. You're telling us that this woman suffers from PTSD because Adam Waldman said that she is orchestrating a hoax, which is not something she hasn't heard before, but she didn't suffer from PTSD after the horrific Australia incident. It just doesn't add up, and I'm hoping the jury will see that too. Back to the personality disorder, I believe she said she didn't even test her for it because she didn't demonstrate any traits outside of Johnny's relationship. So she's saying that Amber's behavior was just confined to when she was in a relationship with Johnny and didn't cross over to the rest of her life, which is completely inconsistent with, for example, Kate James's testimony, which clearly demonstrates that Amber's behaviors, again, were in alignment with BPD traits, histrionic personality disorder, but also her antics on the stand. You know, once Amber took the stand, and this is something we'll get to next, everything that Dr. Curry diagnosed her with and stated was a trait of Amber's completely aligned with Amber's behavior on the stand. Dr. Hughes cherry-picked whatever she liked from other therapists' notes, but if there was something she didn't like, she wouldn't refer to it, and this came up in cross-exam as a criticism. For example, Dr. Anderson talked about mutual abuse, and so she disregarded Dr. Anderson's reports because she disagreed with a lot of what she said. Essentially, she doesn't believe that Amber is a perpetrator because she talked a lot about reactive violence, self-defense, things that Johnny does, essentially. Honestly, just listen to her. It's everything that Johnny did to stay safe, short of laying a finger on her. Because even when his life was in danger, literally, with that finger incident, he never laid a finger on her. And restraining someone to stop them from hitting you, by the way, does not count as laying a finger on someone. That counts as self-defense. The biggest criticism was she spoke to the jury as though she was there. She used language that I think was designed to convince the jury that it was fact rather than hearsay, rather than what Amber told her. And in case you're wondering why it's admitted, it's because it was part of her therapy sessions and part of her analysis and assessments with Amber. And so everything that Amber told her formed part of her analysis, formed part of her ultimate report, and is part of her expert testimony. And that's why it was allowed in. I don't have much time to go through the cross-exam in detail because I really want to move on to Amber. But the cross-examination was highly criticized, and people thought that more could have been done. I don't think it was as bad as many made it out to be when I watched it. I think it was because I saw the response or people's opinions before I watched it. So maybe my expectations were like super low. But essentially the tactic in cross-exam was to really point out her gendered stereotypes. A lot of emphasis was used to point out that she used specific pronouns to denote victims. And she went, yeah, I did, because Amber's the victim in this situation and Johnny's the perpetrator. And so that's why I use these pronouns, which, you know, you're not a fact finder. It's not your job. You weren't there. And that was made clear in cross-exam. She kept being asked. This was based on what Amber told you, though. You didn't witness this, did you? Did you examine Mr. Depp? Did you talk to him? Did you diagnose him? No. Of course, she didn't do any of that. It was all very blind or one-sided. They played clips of Amber going, you know, I didn't punch you, I hit you, and asked her, is that reactive violence? Is that okay for Amber to do? And she said, well, if what I'm hearing on the recording is true, then no. Throwing things, she said, only if done to defend or escape. But otherwise, if it's unprovoked, she admitted in front of the jury that no, that's not reactive violence. The concept of low-level violence was brought up and asked if punching and his finger, is that a low-level violence to you, doctor? And she agreed that it's not. But it's crazy the lengths Dr. Hughes went to excusing Amber's behavior. She even excused the vodka throwing as a reaction to psychological violence and abuse, which destabilized her. To me, that sounded like making excuses for grievous bodily harm. And with PTSD, she didn't even really administer the tests, the CAP-5 test, I think it was, before diagnosing her a year and a half ago multiple times just by talking to her, just by observing her and asking her questions. But the gold standard test that was used by Dr. Curry was administered a year and a half later via Zoom, not even in person like Dr. Curry. And Dr. Hughes said that she does this all the time. Now, I'm not a psychologist, but many psychologists on the internet have pointed out that this is absolutely the wrong way to go about things. The powerful thing, I think, about the cross-exam was it actually ended with her admitting that based on what she saw and based on what she assessed, Johnny too was abused physically and psychologically. So she contradicted herself because she didn't agree with Dr. Anderson's mutual abuse, which I don't agree with. I think Johnny was defending himself, and I think he was engaging in, reactive violence, if you're going to include yelling and calling names, name calling as violence. All right, Amber Heard. I'm going to try to, have a world record here and summarize the last 2 days for you in 20 minutes or so, or less if I can. The thing is with Amber Heard is I've been covering this case on YouTube now for almost exactly 2 years, and we've covered her version of events in quite a lot of detail, which is why you'll forgive me if I skim over these. I'm just going to focus on highlights. Her tactic was to humanize herself in the opening. She was the underdog. I'm not well known like Johnny, and she actually said that. There was a lot of very happy, wistful reminiscing of the good old days with Johnny, but it was clear that she was setting him up as the love-bombing, very experienced, much older, twice my age man who pursued the young and naive Hollywood ingenue who tried to save him, who loved him despite his many flaws, despite the monster that lived within him. He was the jealous one. He was controlling, possessive, slut-shamed her. And the best way to summarize this, which I've seen done before, including to Zach, is that you sit there and listen to the accused completely flip the narrative, placing themselves in the victim's shoes and their victim in the perpetrator's shoes. She had a very disjointed, abrupt way of speaking, with very abrupt stops and starts, abrupt changes of location. Nothing flowed in her story. It was like 1 minute they were on a yacht, and then she starts talking about a bedroom fight, and then she actually kind of goes, oh, sorry, I forgot to tell you, by this point we're in the bedroom, but nothing flowed. It was just all over the place, honestly. With regards to incidents involving his children, she really took on the caretaker, mothering, nurturing personality, and all she cared about was the children's safety, and she was appalled by Johnny's behavior in front of his own kids, and she wanted to just protect them because he wasn't doing it. In fact, he was scaring them. There were a lot of strange inconsistencies with how normal people would behave in certain situations. For example, instances of alleged physical assault that seemed incredibly horrific, really. But what she would say is that really hurt my feelings. There was nothing about the physical aspect of what she went through. It was all emotional. It was all ego when you think about it, which really aligns with Dr. Curry's diagnoses in general. One of the traits of BPD was they feel very easily slighted. They're very easily offended. And that comes up a lot. I was embarrassed. I was so embarrassed that he would do this to me in front of his friends, in front of the security. And she also planted the seed of Johnny surrounded by yes people. She didn't say it directly, but she said, between the lines. And I always wondered why no one did anything. I noticed how everyone would just let him do what he wants. I noticed how whenever he was late on set, people didn't care. She really kind of tried to set the scene of Johnny is the boss. Johnny is the one in power, and everyone else bows down to his whims, which includes when he lays a finger on me. The only photographic evidence that she has, apart from one of a bruise on her arm from 2013, are photos of Johnny sleeping predominantly. That's all she could have. And again, I found that very strange. Why are you photographing your partner and then eventually your husband when he falls asleep? I mean, I don't understand the significance of that. You're not really helping your case. Because when you look at these photos, He's not passed out in his vomit like she said he was. He was mostly sitting upright and dozing off. There was one of him on the hotel floor, but he would routinely talk about how she would keep him up and not allow him to sleep because she still wanted to argue. And I just imagined he was sitting on the floor and just happened to fall asleep. I don't know that's a fact, but photos of someone sleeping have no nexus, no connection whatsoever to someone who is abusive. When she was asked why she would take these photos, by the way, she said because she basically wanted to show him that this is what he does. She wasn't allowed to elaborate because it was hearsay, but she was trying to insinuate that she was documenting it to show him that this is what he puts her through and that he blacks out and doesn't remember it. Speaking of not remembering anything, that seems to be the name of the game with Amber. She very, in my opinion, conveniently tells the jury that I'm sorry, I don't remember. I had, memory loss. I can only remember flashes, which is very similar to Jodi Arias' testimony. A lot of you know about Jodi Arias on this channel. I actually have an entire video talking about her case, and I urge you to look into her because they demonstrate very similar personality traits, and Jodi herself was also diagnosed during her trial with BPD. Again, trying to generalize here, she didn't want to move in with him. She only did it because she wanted stability. The only reason she wanted to get married was, again, maybe getting married will fix things. She really took on this role of, I loved him so much, I would have done anything to make it work, including put up with the monster. Another thing that really stood out to me with Amber's testimony is that despite all the contradictions that she's already heard from other witnesses, I'm talking Ben King, I'm talking Debbie Lloyd, I'm talking Travis McGivern, Malcolm McConnelly, of course, Johnny himself, Christy. All of these witnesses are consistent. Their stories are consistent. And to me, it's because it seems that it's the truth, because there's only one truth. There aren't other versions of the truth. But Amber's story completely contradicts every single one of these witnesses. And I found it odd that she stuck to her guns and stuck to that version despite knowing and sitting there and listening to the opposite side and knowing that the jury listened to all these consistencies. For example, the prenup. She argues that she's the one who wanted the prenup, when we have several witnesses, including Debbie Lloyd actually, who were aware of the fact that Amber was absolutely upset by the fact that Johnny even considered a prenup. She went as far as to say that she's the one who pushed for it. And then when it didn't happen, she wanted a postnup. She's the one who spoke to Christy and she spoke to others and expressed, her belief that they needed a postnup and that it was the right thing to do. But it was Johnny in Australia who blew up over it. This is what I mean by flipping the entire narrative. And I don't like inserting my personal opinions in these types of videos. I know I slip up, I'm human. But this particular tactic that she had really made me sick because, again, I've had to sit there and listen to a perpetrator completely flip the narrative when the victim is sitting right there in the same room. It's very sickening. It made me want to be physically ill there, and it makes me want to be physically ill while I'm watching her. Johnny was the one who kicked up a fuss, and he started a huge fight in Australia over the postnup and wanted to fire Amber's lawyers for even considering the notion, because the only way out of that marriage, as far as Johnny Depp was concerned, was death. She went completely against witness testimony on the Boston flight. We have Keenan Wyatt, who was there as well. People who were not on the payroll, who all testified that Johnny was fine and that Amber was the one who was incredibly angry, incredibly cold, and even screamed at Keenan when he told her, hey, he really loves you. You know that, right? She testified about how she would never retaliate, especially in the beginning, including on the flight. She was the one who would try to get away from Johnny. He was the one who would follow her around and antagonize her and provoke her and poke the bear. And even when he was physical with her, she would just lie down there face flat on the carpet. She remembers looking at many carpets, I will say that. And then she would just get up and peacefully try to get away from him, peacefully stare out the window on the plane. It was completely inconsistent with independent evidence, with independent recordings, not just witness testimony. She went as far as to say that she suggested that they separate for the remainder of Johnny's detox. When we have Dr. Kipper, we have Debbie Lloyd, we have Johnny testifying that the three of them, all agreed that Johnny couldn't do this. I think Johnny came up with it, that Johnny couldn't do this as long as Amber was with him. She was interfering. She was making it more difficult for him to detox. And so he set her up to have fun with her friends in a hotel so that he can continue. But to her version was, it was her idea. What's interesting is that Elaine pulled up a message to kind of prove this. But to me, if you read that message, it's very clear that Johnny tells her, hey, I love you and I miss you, but this is for the best. It reads to me that this is coming from Johnny. This is Johnny's idea. He decided that despite the distance, this is for the best. One troubling thing that should come up in rebuttal, I believe, is the apologetic text message Johnny sent her after the Boston flight. I've always said that these messages can be problematic in the eyes of a jury. And so it is very important for Camille to address this in rebuttal and have Johnny, for example, clarify again, remind the jury again what he meant by that message. They tried to bring in Stephen Duder's message that was successfully objected to on the grounds of hearsay, and that was a victory because that message also doesn't read out too good. I understand that victims can placate their perpetrators. You can placate people just to kind of stop them from blowing up, just to kind of keep them away, stay away from the blast radius. So I'm not saying that Stephen's message proves anything, but it is problematic. It's one less thing to deal with, hopefully. Now, the Australia incident was particularly difficult and disgusting to sit through. I actually found it okay to watch most of her testimony because she was so unbelievable to me, you know? As humans, we can tell instinctively when someone's being honest with their emotions. If you feel nothing when someone is having a breakdown on the stand, that's because there's nothing. You know, it's that shallowness that Dr. Curry talked about, shallow emotions, no depth, and highly dramatic. It really reminded me of her 2016 deposition where you just see anger in her. You just see rage. You don't see fear. You don't see real sorrow. It's all forced. And it was so obvious because we're all human. You don't have to be a body language expert. This goes beyond it. But yeah, the Australia incident, as I said, completely flipped around. I will not go through details, but she contradicted evidence from independent sources such as Ben King. For example, the smashed phone, she stuck to that story. She completely plagiarized Johnny's version of the glass bottles whooshing past him. That was straight out of Johnny's testimony, and we did see her take notes furiously throughout, not just his testimony, but many others. And she alleged that he was the one who was throwing those bottles at her. And she also said he was doing this with velocity, which really stood out to me because that word was specifically used by Johnny's hand surgeon when Johnny tried to convince him that he crushed his finger in the accordion doors. They then move on to the staircase incident with Whitney, where she insisted that Whitney was going to be pushed down the stairs and that Whitney was in between them, completely contradicting Travis. And the James Corden show, she described that in a lot of detail. And then they put up photos, and all I could think sitting there was, how, in all honesty, can you keep a straight face and put up photos of you looking perfectly fine? And Elaine asked her to tell the jury, what are they looking at? And we have these photos of her looking perfectly fine. And she actually tells them that I have a broken nose in that photo. She had a broken nose in the Met Gala in 2014 as well. There are photos of her the very next day, dressed up, glammed up, looking absolutely fine. I really think Amber Heard needs help. It's not my place to say that because I'm not a professional. I'm not a mental health expert. But this is someone who, over the past 2 days, I believe has really demonstrated to us just how sick they are. You know, they're very mentally ill. She is very mentally ill. And she described, you know, even when she described the James Corden show, she insisted she had a broken nose, but then she agreed that she went on to the show because she iced her injury overnight. You don't fix a broken nose by icing your nose overnight. or by using Amica cream. She said for Christmas 2015, no one else, her family and Raquel's family didn't want to go to the island with them anymore after they saw her face. Well, why didn't they report anything to the police? If my mother saw me broken and bashed up by my husband, she wouldn't care. If my brothers saw me, she wouldn't care what I thought. She would call the police to protect her daughter. She keeps talking about how close her father and Johnny were and how they did drugs together. I noticed she throws her father under the bus a lot, by the way, which is something else Jodi Arias did. Everything wrong with her was due to her father. So why didn't your father confront Johnny? Your father seems like a really tough guy. He's okay with his daughter getting bashed up. It doesn't line up. It just doesn't line up. But yeah, that's it for this video. I really hope I gave you the gist of it because, again, there's a lot of information, way too much for me to pack in. So do tune into the podcast. It's on YouTube, by the way. It's not like an audio podcast. It is called The Plutonium Show. It's just the same channel here, Lost Beyond Pluto. There is a playlist where the focus is more of a commentary aspect, really getting into more detail rather than just recapping, because the purpose of these videos is just to give you all a summary. But if you'd like to listen to even a male survivor, a male victim of a female perpetrator, who is Zach, my partner, do tune in. It's very hard for him to talk about it, but I would never make him do this if he wasn't comfortable and he thinks that the cause is too important. And I do believe that Johnny believes, the same thing. Johnny is putting himself through this because it's worth it to wake people up to the reality that men are human and men are vulnerable and men can be destroyed by women. I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for tuning in. Podcast schedule has been updated. We used to release on Thursdays, which is far too late. We've since revamped the schedule and we are going to be aiming to put up podcasts very early on in the week, preferably Mondays. So it'll be very up to date before the next week's trial proceedings progress. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the next one.